Hey guys, welcome back for some more tutorials. I am Magnet as usual, and today we're going to be talking about defeating Colossus in Terran versus Protoss. Mainly we want to defend big attacks from these Colossus. We want to talk about how to change your unit compositions to react properly. And of course the biggest thing is reacting it and knowing what's going on in time to make the changes to what you need to make. So we'll talk a lot about this in these games, and we'll just jump right in actually. And we're not watching the Protoss today, we are watching Bomber. And he's fighting Crank, which it seems like we watch Bomber a lot in these videos because he is very good, of course, and he seems to hit a lot of Protosses that do things that kind of are hard to defend against. So he's a really good guy to watch so far, and I think the last like 3 or 4 videos have all had Bomber in it, but either way, at least the last 3 or 4 TvP videos. But Bomber's just going to start off with a normal build here, and he's known for not going Reaper, and I've talked about this a lot in the sense that going Reaper really gets you a lot of scouting information, and Bomber just kind of plays a little blind. We're not going to focus too much on the openers though, because there's other videos for that. So Colossus really won't start surfacing until 2 bases, so we're just going to watch from the point when he gets 2 bases put together and how he reacts to what he sees. So he's getting his second base up now. He's going to run a normal biocomposition, which we're going to see in basically every TvP, considering mech is not really figured out in Starcraft right now, at least against Protoss. So he's going to open with a mine drop, and we've talked about this opener as well before. There is more information to be had on it if you want to check it out, but we really need to wait and see what the Protoss is doing most of all. So Bomber scans, and he sees in the base here a robo already. What he really needs to see though is the fact that it's going to be for Colossus tech, and there is a robotics bay on the way, which you can see way down here in the bottom of the Protoss natural. So it's kind of hidden pretty well, and you need to know about this sooner rather than later, because the reaction to Colossus is obviously Vikings. That's the most obvious thing to do against this, but he needs to double check this and figure out what's going on sooner rather than later. And the openers on 2 base for Protoss are really going to be either Colossus, they could also be Blink, or Storm, or Charge, or something like that, and you need to verify that it's Colossus so that you can make the right reaction in time to defeat it. So he's just going to open up with a mine drop here, and there's not a whole lot to say. Getting upgrades is obviously very important in this matchup, so keep up on your upgrades, and especially if you get behind on upgrades against Colossus compositions, and you're going to be in a ton of trouble. But the drop is coming in now. It really shouldn't do too much, and this is mostly about when Bomber figures out what's going on. He gets close to the Colossus bay, but he doesn't really realize it yet, and he might not know until he sees the first Colossus. And this is one of the fastest Colossus builds you're going to see. The Colossus is already done about 8:30. So about at this time is when you're going to want to rescan to double check to figure out what's going on if you don't really know. Right now Bomber doesn't really know what's going on. He just saw a few stalkers. He thinks, or rather he knows there's an observer on the map because the robo was spinning when he scanned, and not really much else makes sense at this point. And the Colossus can either be used for more defensive purposes, or it can be used for a really aggressive attack. So you need to figure out which one it is, and you need to figure that out quickly. So one thing you can do is you can just sit a unit down here at the 3rd base so you know whether he's planning on being defensive with his Colossus, or if you should be expecting an all-in here in the near future. So Bomber is just going to continue to drop here, and this is one of the strengths against fast Colossus builds, is that you can oftentimes just pull them apart because they have so few units, and you can make them waste overcharges, and maybe you can pick off a Colossus with your aggression if you get fortunate enough to do that. So there's a lot of different opportunities, and honestly, if Bomber knew this, if he knew the composition here, he could probably actually just drop it right on top of the Colossus and either trade well or even kill the Colossus. Maybe he'll kill some other units, but targeting down these Colossus and keeping the count manageable is one of the best ways to deal with these Colossus openers. So if you can find little avenues to do that, that would be perfect. Obviously he doesn't have perfect map information, but doing a drop here I think is going to reveal the Colossus to him for the very first time. So now he sees the Colossus. If you get force fielded like this, you can't afford to stick around and try to fight this, because the Colossus is just going to melt everything. So just get back in your dropships as soon as possible. You just select everything and kind of click it on the medevacs, and they'll get in there. And now that he sees, maybe he sees the second Colossus so far. No. If he were to see the second Colossus, he would know that these are super fast Colossus, and it may be for a timing or an all-in. But nevertheless, his production here off of his starport should really shift into Vikings sooner rather than later. And most of the time against Colossus, you will want extra Viking production on beyond just 2. So we'll see when he realizes that. Of course, picking up like we were talking about, trying to keep his drops alive here. And you really won't be able to peel them apart too well with Colossus if they're only on 2 bases. The drops are going to start to get strong once they take a 3rd, because recovering from that far of distance with Colossus is going to take forever. So he's just continuing to reload and redrop here. He's sending the Marine out here to get scouting information so he can see maybe if Crank starts moving across the map. And that's exactly what he's going to see. So I pressed the wrong button here, my bad. V and B are too close to one another. So he starts to move down here, and he's going to see the attack start to move across the map here. He just sees the one stalker, but he could have stuck around and figured out what's going on. He should also know what's going on because there's pylons that are starting to come up near his base before a 3rd base has really ever been shown. So this is one of the variants you could come up across, and this is just a 2-base Colossus timing. These can be pretty nasty if you don't know what to do against them, and what you really need to do is you need to add bunkers as soon as humanly possible. And we can see that Bomber figured this out before we did, because he had some sort of read, maybe on the speed of that first Colossus. Pretty unusual to have it out that fast, and maybe he's just anticipating this. So as long as they're staying on 2 bases, I wouldn't get too crazy about taking your own 3rd if they have Colossus out, especially if they're showing this type of aggression. And the only real way you're going to hold this off, like I was talking about, is with extra bunkers and by switching your composition into more of Vikings. On 2 bases, you can reasonably afford a 3rd starport just without a reactor, and you can afford 3 Vikings at a time. It's obviously a lot more smooth if you have a 3rd base running, but the Vikings that represent the long-term damage that are eventually going to hold the Colossus attacks off, while the bunkers tank as much damage as possible, while you hopefully can repair with your SCVs against the force fields and stuff that are going to come down. So pushing across the map is Crank right now. Because Bomber has prepared so well, he should be okay against this. He does have a random mine mixed in there just in case there's a lot of zealots. But, I mean, he should be able to... He obviously knows what's going on here. Now the force fields start coming down, and you want to try and keep as many units alive against a timing like this. The Vikings being alive this entire time is the most important factor, because they're going to be what eventually kills the Colossus. And if you get trapped forward like this, you really want the bunkers to be taking the damage while you repair them. So you can still do medevac micro to pick stuff up from here and put it back behind your bunkers. Another thing to note is that Bomber is really on no Marine production right now. Marauders are much better against Colossus than Marines. So if you can possibly get extra production for Marauders out, especially to hold off attacks like this, then that's going to really bode well for you. So the production that's coming down right now is just Vikings and Marauders, and he needs to keep everything alive as long as possible, and especially the Vikings, because once the Vikings start to knock down Colossus, then the damage from this army becomes really pathetic. We're going to see more attacks coming up here. Bomber's getting force fielded pretty hard, not opting to pick up Marauders here, rather he's just trying to repair his bunkers for as long as possible. Sometimes you may have to bait the Colossus and stuff up to your natural too. So he has more Vikings rallying. If your bunkers fall, you really want to grab everything and kind of move it back somewhere. Maybe you can move your Vikings somewhere to some dead airspace that it makes it hard for stalkers to get to. And then you might have to pull SCVs against something like this too. Considering if you can get enough surface area, you can let the SCVs take some damage while the Marauders start to knock down stalkers and whatnot, and the Vikings continue to go to work. So if you get broken down on your bunkers right here, you shouldn't be still trying to hold this ground. This ground is pretty much lost. Just fall back a little bit into your natural and maybe get ready to pull SCVs against something like this. So we're seeing the Marauders still be pretty good. The Vikings are doing a lot of work, and if you can individually target down the hurt Colossus, then that's going to really help out. So repositioning your army here, you can see he's falling back a little more like we were talking about. Repositioning his Vikings to get better hits on this Colossus is going to do a lot of beneficial things for you. So the Colossus is super red. He needs to continue to figure out where the Colossus are shooting from and try to target those down. But keeping your production going throughout this is so important. You really can't afford to miss any beats with your macro here. This Colossus is one shot away from death. You can see it's at 2 HP, so just sending forward one Viking to get that is totally worth it. So Crank has done quite a bit of damage with this, but as long as Bomber can stabilize and continue to put out this unit composition, and if he ever can hold this off and push back against him, that'll be very, very strong. You can see the Vikings, they kind of mistargeted there for a second. He needs to target down that hurt Colossus. But he's just waiting. He's waiting for the Colossus to come up this ramp, because then there's a lot more surface area to attack it. So that's why Crank has decided, alright, I think I've done okay with this, but if I keep going, then it's going to get worse and worse trades for me. I don't know what he just blew up, but either way, Now at this point, if they went for this 2-base Colossus attack, their transitions into a 3rd base are going to be super rigid. So you should be thinking about counterattacking and trying to reduce this Colossus count even further while they're trying to transition, because most of the time they're going to try to transition to things like Charge, Blink, Templar, stuff like that. And if you can catch them when you have a high Marauder count and a high Viking count, you might be able to just win the game right there. So we'll continue to watch this for just a little bit. It was mostly about being able to hold that initial timing from Crank, considering he was relying on that a lot in order to deal the damage. And now he's starting to load up for really big drops here, and this is going to punish Crank if he starts to try to take a 3rd base somewhere. And multi-prong drops are really good against Colossus openers, especially ones that stay on continuing to produce Colossus. So you can start trying to peel them apart like that. But the Viking count is especially important, and just keeping that production rolling, maybe adding on another starport as soon as you can get your 3rd setup is a really good idea. So Bomber's starting to move across the map, and this is the next thing you need to realize, is that if they only stop on 2 Colossus, you need to know when to stop making Vikings, because if they switch into Storms and you're too worried about killing Colossus and the Storms kill all your Vikings or something, then all of a sudden you haven't really dealt with it. So from this point, like I said, you can either counterattack right away before the Storm becomes important, or you can just take a 3rd base and continue to play defensively and not worry too much more about the Colossus if they are transitioning. So this needs to be on you to figure out what's going on. And if Bomber were to scan, he could see the Templar archives possibly in the back here. It depends on where he places his scan, but he could possibly see that. But more importantly, he's just seeing a lot of Zealots, and maybe he can see some Templar coming down or something and notice that the transition is underway. So part of beating Colossus builds is knowing when they're transitioning off of Colossus, so you don't have like 40 Vikings against 2 Colossus and no ground army. So you definitely need to be on top of that. But mostly I just wanted to demonstrate the way that Bomber held that initial attack. And this game goes on for a lot longer. That kind of goes beyond the scope of this video. So let's go ahead and check out another game involving defeating Colossus. And it won't involve such a quick timing, so we can see a little bit of different Colossus builds that are going to be put together. So this is Byung. He's fighting Hero, and Byung is one of the well-known Terrans for directly countering what a Protoss is doing, like almost overly hard to the point where it can hurt him sometimes. But we'll see how he deals with Hero's Colossus play. So again, not going to pay too much attention to the openers here. Kind of a random depot placement, to be honest. But Byung just kind of getting up everything that he wants to get up. He's going to open up with a Reaper build, unlike Bomber from the last game. So Reapers, or no, actually this is going to be a proxy factory, so never mind. But again, this doesn't have much of an outcome on this game, especially with defeating Colossus. The Colossus do come later, and this can be a little bit of a different variant as Hero's opening up with an Oracle. So just getting this out here, Byung is going to probably drop some mines somewhere in the base. Oh, he already did. Okay, and they usually shouldn't do much against better Protoss players. He actually got a pretty decent connection there, but again, that doesn't have a lot to do with the Colossus stuff. So he's just really getting his base up, adding on more barracks right now, getting a bunker on the low ground, of course, to defend against any random timings. They mostly just want to see what Byung knows and when he knows it. So we're going to be waiting for, listening out for any scans, or maybe if he scouted well enough, he can see with a drop what's going on, but he doesn't really know anything yet. You can see that's his vision of the base right now. Colossus Bay is on the way, and we know it's right here. So you can see the Protoss can sometimes be pretty sneaky about where to place these, and sometimes scans won't always get a hold of that. Now there's a Phoenix out as well, and we'll talk about Phoenix Colossus in another video, because it's a very different unit composition that requires a lot different reactions. I guess I could have folded that in here, but I'm kind of wary of doing that right now because it's becoming such a much more popular composition and people are still figuring out a lot. So I'm going to wait on those types of videos until it's kind of stabilized a little more. And it's going to be more so about how to deal with the Phoenix rather than the Colossus specifically. So yeah, posting up for a little bit of an attack here is Byung. He's still pretty blind. He doesn't really know that there's Colossus on the field yet, so he can't start creating Vikings or anything. And this is why getting on the map and seeing what attacks your army is going to be a really valuable scouting tool. So if you were to get far enough in and see what resists him, and he sees this Colossus, then he knows he's going against Colossus for sure. If you just sit on your side of the map, then you're not really going to know what the Protoss is doing. So that's the point behind a lot of these attacks. And now he can see the Colossus, so now he should know, alright, I need to switch into something else. I need to be responding to this Colossus a little bit better. And again, he's not expecting to do a lot of damage. This is just to figure out what's going on. And now we'll note there are Vikings on the way. Byong does have a third command center that's almost done. He just needs to be sure that this isn't the variation where he just makes 2 Colossus or 3 Colossus or whatever and pushes across the map to try and kill him. So he does have stuff around here for spotting. Does have a Marine there. You can see that Hero's showing some interest in getting this down, considering he's killing the rocks. He's kind of moving his army down there. Here comes the third base attempt right now here from Byong. And this is again what I'm talking about with Colossus, is if you can kind of start to peel them apart, it'll be a lot easier to get maybe cancels or kills on this third base if his army's out of position. So Colossus take a long time to recover to everything, especially if they don't open up with something like Blink first. Hero does have Blink, but considering his army is all in one blob, it's still pretty slow, and you can cancel a lot of bases and get a lot of harassment done against these type of Colossus openers. So there's a third Colossus on the way, so this is going to be a pretty heavy commitment into Blink Colossus. And this is one of those compositions where if you really want to fight it, you have to be going Viking production basically non-stop, and you have to hit some sort of really strong timing in order to deal with that. If you just kind of haphazardly do whatever and attack into Blink Colossus and you're not really that prepared for the unit composition, it should actually crush you pretty hard. So that's, I mean, a lot of people do get into that situation and they're like, I don't get how they can just make Colossus and wreck me in every single fight. That's because your responses to this type of Colossus play have to be really sharp. You'll notice once again there are a lot of Marauders in production, not very many Marines. He's staying pretty Marauder heavy against this, and he's going to eventually build up to a point where he's able to kill this Colossus attack, or rather this Colossus composition. Another thing you could do is you could do one of these big SCV pull builds where you try to get Ghosts out to EMP the sentries, and then the Vikings kill the Colossus, and then you have SCVs and all sorts of bio and stuff on the ground to attack that. But that's again more specialized. I don't think we're going to focus on it too much, but Byong is very well known for SCV pull timings. So it's been a little while since I've seen this game. That may be what he opts for, but he's getting +1 Viking attack, still producing Vikings, and even adding on another starport here. So this is what I mean. You need to add on this extra starport, and you can't mess around against these Colossus. You need some way to kill them, and Vikings are ultimately going to be the way to do that. Note that we also talked about in the last game that the transitions are going to be really common into Storm and Charge and stuff after this. So they're not usually going to stay on a lot of Colossus for a long time. And this is Byong taking a little bit of a different approach from the last game. He's going for a really hard timing to try and just straight up kill the Colossus. You can see the Ghost Academy is on the way, either preempting for the Storm transition, or this could be an SCV pull. Both of them are pretty viable against somebody that just sits there and makes Colossus for a long time. So there are 4 Colossus on the map right now. Byong scans, and he does see the Templar Archive, so he knows that Storm is on the way. And SCV pulls are really not going to work very well against Storm. So you need to either get in there before the Storm is going to finish with your SCV pulls, or you need to be ready to go with the Ghosts, maybe with Mines. More importantly, the Vikings killing the Colossus is going to really gimp his army strength. Also note, one thing I thought was really weird about this game is there's very low amounts of medevacs, and that's just because he's keeping his original medevacs alive for as long as possible, so he doesn't have to go home and rebuild them. Having to rebuild medevacs against a Colossus composition is one of the most annoying things, because not only do you have to spend more money on it, but you have to stop Viking production and switch into, or rather stop Viking production and switch back into medevacs, which really hurts your composition overall. So by now, the Colossus are still only at 4. You're not going to see them go much higher than that, which is why you need to be ready for these types of switches. But the Viking count is pretty high. Usually about 3 Vikings for every Colossus is a pretty good count. And mostly you're going to want to try and target down the Colossus one at a time. But keeping your Vikings alive is a really big, important factor in this. So landing EMPs on the Templar or dodging Storms is really important. If you just attack in there and you get Storms all over your Vikings and the Colossus are still standing, then you're in a lot of trouble. So Byong is still just building up his composition here, getting the Ghosts out, getting the Vikings out, and this is what will progress you into the later stages of the game so that you can still win these battles against Protoss. So what you really want to try and do is you really want to try and gain position with this army to force the Protoss to attack into you. So if they start to attack into you, this is when you're going to start to lead with your Ghosts, try to EMP the Templar and try to EMP some Stalkers, maybe kill those, and then the Vikings should have pretty free range to take down the Colossus. And in the meantime, you really don't want to fight too hard with your ground army while all this is going on. You want to try to kill as many Colossus as possible and get them down to about 1 or 2 before you can fully engage with the rest of your army. So if you can control it that way, then you're going to do really well. And also note that EMPs do affect everything, so even landing EMPs on the Colossus is a good trade. So Byung's still just pressing forward here. Hero realizes the attack potential here, and you don't want to chase too hard into storms. That's why being careful with this composition is very key. A little bit of a run by coming up here, not really going to do anything, but Byung is just trying to get a good position here so he can spend his supplies as far as switching them out for better supplies. And as the game goes on, you're going to eventually switch into more Ghost Viking just to try to directly counter the Templar and the Colossus from this point forward. One thing the Vikings can do as well is if you can ever kill this observer, then the landing EMPs on the rest of the army is really easy, and dealing with the support is really easy. You could even cloak your ghosts, or rather the whole point is to kill the observer and then cloak the ghost, so that this Colossus can't even really do anything. You can pick off Colossus there, you can pick off Templar. Ultimately, it's really just about using these Vikings to some utility to eventually gain an advantage over the Colossus army. So he kills the observer right away. He needs to still be careful of storms, but now notice that the ghosts are pressing up here, and Hero really has no detection, so he EMPs absolutely everything. And note at the same time he's also getting good position with his army to force the Protoss to have to attack into him, so that killing Colossus with your Vikings is super easy. So a lot of EMPs are going to be dropped here while the Protoss runs away. You could throw down defensive storms here, but at this point just trading out the ghosts for the EMPs is going to be really worthwhile. So the whole army is EMP'd right now. This is some crazy ghost EMPs right now, and the Colossus are going to be worthless here because they're all at no shields. The Vikings are totally untouched, and if you sit the Vikings somewhere over here, you can pick off the Colossus from the side while the rest of the army is so worried about dealing with the ground army that you can even just run the ground army away from the attacks and deal a lot of damage that way. So we're going to continue to see Byung kind of control his way through this. So note where we're talking about the Vikings coming up from the right side. They're going to focus on the Colossus immediately, and notice how he's running away with the rest of his army, because if you don't take damage from the Colossus while they're dying, that's going to be perfect, and at this point trading out the Vikings just to kill the Colossus is totally worth it, assuming you don't lose any of your ground army. So there's a lot of moving parts to these battles, but you need to find a way to get an advantage so that you can kill the Colossus basically for free. So the Colossus are going to start falling like mad. He's still trying to kite away from this army the best he possibly can. And again, he's just straight up trading the Vikings out for the Colossus. And if anything else tries to leak forward, and if he pulls his Colossus back or whatever, you can still be more aggressive with your ground army. But look at this. Now there's no Colossus on the field. You can land your Vikings, you can take on the rest of this army pretty well, and look at Byung's enormous supply lead. And that all really stemmed from getting this position and from getting the observer. It's funny how these battles can really start to fall apart from the Protoss perspective, but you need to be aware of all the moving parts and all the different things that you need to seek out to do. And it's really only possible if he's able to produce that many Vikings, if he's able to get the type of position that he got, landing EMPs and forcing the Protoss to attack into you, all different factors in order to peel this apart. You can see it really only took one good peeling apart in order to make this successful. Byung might get pushed off for just a little while against the transition here, but the Colossus are dealt with. There's not going to be any Colossus for a long time, and if you ever reset their count, they're going to have to increment these out one at a time most of the time, and Byung's even just saying that's not worth it, or rather Hero's just saying it's not worth it. I'm just going to switch into Immortals and Templar and Zealots and whatnot. So just be on top of what's going on. By this stage of the game, you should be on a lot of Ghost and Viking production anyway. Note that Byung does have a fourth base behind this as well, so really just kind of outplaying Hero in pretty much every perspective. So I at least hope that gave you guys some good ideas as far as dealing with Colossus in this matchup. I know they can be frustrating, but if you know how to kind of decompose these battles into different parts that you can win, you can see how easy it is to just run over the Terran, or rather run over the Protoss and get these huge advantages. We'll also note that Byung did go on to win this game quite comfortably, considering he's up by 70 supply. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll be back with more videos very soon. Check out more of my Terran tutorials down in the description. There's a link to the playlist for it. But I will see you guys very soon. Take care.